Hello, I'm Dylan.
And I'm Kiyan.
I'm Brendan.
And I'm Nathan.
And this is Trust Your Doctor, that podcast where we read books. Surprise, we actually read.
Right.
What did we read? Lost of the Gaderene, which was written by Mark Gatiss and published in January of 2000. And presuming you're not deaf and you're listening to this podcast, you will have noticed we have two guests on the show today.
Right.
They are.
Hello.
There they are. They're all the way on the other side of the world.
Indeed, we're Brendan and Nathan from Sydney, from the Flight Through Entirety podcast, and we're the only Doctor Who podcast who's got a Spitfire just sitting in the backyard.
Oh, well, there you go. I mean, not many people can say they just own a Spitfire now, can they?
No, indeed.
It's just us and Alec Whistler, really.
Yes. Yes. Good old Mother
Stronghold.
Whistler.
Spitfire owning.
I'm pretty sure Mark Gatiss has got one in the background. It's in the backyard too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't be
A
surprised.
little bit of trivia for you. Mark Gatiss has a beautiful golden retriever.
Does he really?
Or possibly a Labrador. I always get them mixed up. But I've met Mark Gatiss's dog, and he's gorgeous.
You met
How
just
have you
the
met
dog.
Mark Gatiss's dog?
Well, I actually met Mark Gatiss at a birthday barbecue for Nigel Fairs, and it was just after Victory of the Daleks had gone out, and someone said to him, you know what, I don't actually mind the new Dalek designs, and he said, yeah, the problem with Victory of the Daleks is people seem to forget I wrote a script.
So, Mark, can we talk about Mark Gatiss? Can I just sort of leap in and take control for a second?
Of course, yes, go ahead.
How carefully
Yeah.
planned.
I'm sorry, boys, he does this.
Yeah,
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
So, Mark Gatiss is sort of a little bit famous in England. Have you guys heard of the League of Gentlemen?
I have vaguely heard of it.
Yeah, vaguely.
So it's not the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. It's sort of Sean Connery and lots of out of copyright sort of superheroes.
Yeah, and Tom Sawyer with his superpower being guns. Yeah.
Yeah, no, none of that. It's a really, really creepy and terrifying sketch comedy program that ran for 3 seasons. What do you reckon, in the late 90s?
Yeah, 3 seasons and a movie.
Yeah, and it's really terribly funny. And it has that sort of small English village thing that we're going to be discussing as we talk our way through this episode.
Yeah,
and of course, everyone knows that Gatiss has starred in Doctor Who. He's Professor Lazarus in the Lazarus Experiment. And he's written how many? We decided 5 new series?
7.
7 new series episodes.
Wow, is it that much, actually?
Which Kiyan wouldn't know about. Kiyan, have you never watched the new series?
Yeah, no, I haven't. I just started from the classic show, right from the very first episode.
Oh, right. Oh, the fun you're going to have.
I think that's so superb.
No, really. That's wonderful. I wish I was in that position as an adult.
Yeah, imagine if Billy was your first Doctor and Barbara was your first companion. It would just be spectacular. So we were going to talk about, what it's been like, because we've both been watching, well, all 4 of us have been watching Doctor Who from the beginning and podcasting about it.
Right.
So have you guys ever explained on your podcast how this all came about?
In a shoddily put together intro episode.
Yeah, as is the entire show. Very shoddily put together.
Yeah, we can go ahead and we can talk about that a little now.
Yeah.
Dylan, I know.
How did we? I think one of us texted the other person like, "Hey, you know, it'd be funny. We should just watch all of Doctor Who."
Yeah, it was actually a joke because I think it was around when Dylan was first starting to get pretty into Doctor Who.
Yeah.
And he was like, "Hey, Kiyan, there's there's 800 or so episodes of Doctor Who," and I think I said, just as a joke, we should just watch all of them, and then it actually happened.
We are a year later, well into the Pertwee era.
Wondering why we even started in the first place. No.
Sometimes.
So any regrets, Kiyan? I mean...
well, it's been fun, but it's been... well, those weeks we had to backlog episodes were quite interesting, I'll say.
Cramming in 2 recordings a week.
I know you guys watch that much, actually, regularly. I think.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, pretty much. But how did you find? I mean, there was heaps of stuff that I'd never seen before, and particularly the recons. I mean, you guys have, like, we've all watched everything, I think, up until a certain point. But I actually found some of the weeks a little bit rough going.
Yeah, well, our season 3, for instance, the third Hartnell season, where most of it's missing, and we did that. I was going overseas about a week after that. Oh, sorry, that's our special guest star, Nathan's dog Gracie.
Hi, Gracie.
Hello there.
He's just going to deal with her barking now, so I'll carry on. Yeah, when we were doing season 3, it ended up being a 7-hour recording session.
Oh,
jeez.
Which included, towards the end, Richard and Nathan almost coming to blows over the massacre, which I understand you guys didn't like either, so I'm in the minority on this occasion. And it actually, Richard sort of messaged me when I got back from my trip to America saying, we're never going to have a recording that long again, are we? And I said, no, it's fine. He said, good, because I may not have wanted to continue.
It was brutal.
So
we had to stop and watch Richard make dinner, actually, in between episodes 3 and 4.
Yeah, that's right, because we were recording at Richard's place, and he put on a full roast dinner between episodes.
Oh, I think he was starting a new job the next day. I mean, it was really just a confluence of the worst possible things that could ever happen, including the massacre.
Indeed. Oh, man.
So, yeah, instead of 3 recording sessions for Troughton, we ended up doing, I think, 5 recording sessions for Troughton, 5 or 6, just to space it out a bit so we didn't all go insane.
Right.
Yeah, those recons can be grating. I mean, just having to go through the seasons full of no footage.
Yeah, just slideshows. Some of them are all right. Like, I was actually surprised. I watched Marco Polo for the first time. And I think just because that was such a lavish production, it was really heavily photographed. And so those recons are pretty good. But, I mean, the Massacre recon is really terrible because there's nearly no photos.
Yeah.
It's just that guy photoshopped against a series of backgrounds and stuff.
Yeah, the guy playing Gaston, they've got like 2 photos of him. They've got him in profile looking down slightly, and they've got him in the middle of shouting something. So, yeah, it all looks very... I loved the Massacre, but it's such a pity it wasn't more photographed because of John Bloody Wiles.
Do you remember Space Pirates, where there's an entire character who no one took a photo of? And so they had to rope in someone's grandfather or something to kind of pretend to be him and take photos of him and sort of Photoshop him against Milo Clancy's spaceship and stuff.
I think possibly my favourite inventive recon moment is... you know what? The house from Evil of the Daleks is still standing. Let's get one of our wives into the Victoria dress and walk her down the corridors with this Dalek, because I just thought that's wonderfully inventive.
That's actually another one that is pretty watchable.
Yeah. I mean, I think the plot is complete bobbins, but, I'm
You're in a minority.
I am in a minority.
With me, I'd have to agree with you.
The recons, I thought, what I liked, actually, is that they offered those sometimes, quite funny, blurbs at the bottom. The Doctor messes with the control panel randomly and it explodes from
the power of the
Daleks.
That was a good one.
Yes.
Ian examines the prince. I always remember that one because it was the very first one to show up in Marco Polo.
I actually found myself getting annoyed at their punctuation because I'm a school teacher, and so
sometimes their punctuation is
that's just me.
Nathan is a school teacher. Todd's a school teacher. I used to be a school teacher.
The school teacher cost.
We sometimes get hung up on grammatical inconsistencies. Yeah. Just wait until we get to the invisible enemy. Bit of foreshadowing for you there. What was I going to say? Our podcast had quite a long gestation because when 2012, my boyfriend said to me, I want to watch all of Doctor Who from the beginning. And didn't they do audios between the stories? I want to listen to all of those as well in the proper places.
Oh, no.
And by the time we actually got through An Unearthly Child, he said, maybe just the TV stuff? Yeah, just the TV stuff. And he said to me at one point, oh, but there's stuff we're going to have to skip, isn't there, because they don't exist? And I said, oh, there's these recons. And our relationship survived miraculously.
It even survived him giving City of Death 7 out of 10.
I know.
Yeah.
But, you know, that was quite interesting. And I sort of took his notes as we were going along with a view to maybe starting a blog. And then I discovered The Wife in Space. It was like, oh, well, that's already been done. Mm-hmm. And as wonderful as Rod and I are, we're not as funny as Sue. So,
do you guys know about that?
No.
Have you guys read The Wife in Space?
No.
Oh, you really should. It's at wifeinspace.com. It's Neil Perryman, who used to be Nider on Twitter.
Uh-huh.
And he would tweet from the Khaled bunker. And he makes his wife, Sue, who's never watched Doctor Who, watch every episode, including the recons, all the way through. And she gives it each one a mark out of 10. And she's really, really terrifically funny. And in fact, at the moment, they're doing a little special sort of guest reappearance because they're blogging series 1 of the new series, just to celebrate the 10th anniversary.
Right.
So if any of your listeners haven't seen it, it's wifeinspace.com. It's really, really terrifically funny. And there's a great book that goes with it as well. So, that's just another experience of the full horror of taking a flight through entirety.
So it was then about a year later, Richard and Nathan were round at our place for Christmas drinks, and we were all looking at my Doctor Who action figure collection. I've got about 250 of them. And
he's a grown man.
I'm a grown man with 250 Doctor Who action figures and about 30 Nintendo amiibos. I need help. But
we've all got out.
We were discussing the action. I heard a bit of a slow clap. We were discussing the action figures, and I think Richard was making up stupid stories about them, sort of picking up Martha and putting her next to John Pertwee and saying, no, this would have been very interesting in the home counties. And I just said, you know what, guys, I've been thinking about doing a blog, but now I'm thinking about doing a podcast. We're kind of bouncing off each other well here. How about we do that? And it took us a few months to actually arrange a date. We recorded the first one in April last year. This week.
We started.
Yeah. This week marks our first anniversary of recording podcasts. And, that's it. All sort of kicked off from there. And we just met once a month after that and did a 3 or 4 hour recording session each month. Kicking my boyfriend out of the flat in the process. It's like, you go off and watch a movie. He's fine. He's gone off and watched Transformers on his own because I won't watch that.
Good choice. I'm curious as to how you came up with your name, Flight Through Entirety.
Well, I'd actually had it buzzing around in my head for a while. I think since about 2010, which I think is when The Chase came out on DVD. I was living in the UK at the time in a terrible, terrible job, so Doctor Who DVDs were my solace. And I was watching it, and one of the episode titles in that is Flight Through Eternity. And I had a bit of wordplay and thought, oh, Flight Through Entirety, that sounds like a good name for a Doctor Who marathon. Right. So the name had been kicking around in my head for a while, and I think during the initial discussions, we did all have ideas for titles, and I just said, guys, I think I've got the title already. It's Flight Through Entirety, and Nathan's, one of his favourite stories is The Chase.
Right. I haven't listened to your Chase episode, so if you want to just lie to me and say that you really liked it, I'd be super happy.
We did, didn't we? That was the one where Barbara and Ian got rid now, right?
Yeah. But yeah, it all just came from there. I can't even remember what the alternate names were now. I think the other forerunner was just called We Watch Doctor Who.
Prosaic, but sort of accurate.
It is accurate.
And we do have another podcast in the works.
As do we.
Episode.
Ours has been in the works for over a year.
It's been in the works since episode 5, and we're going to record 69 later today. It's been in the works for a long time.
Yeah, I think we've been talking about this other one for about 6 months. Actually, no, I think we've been talking about it for quite a long time. Nathan has been really agitating for this project.
I've got a name as well already, but I can't tell you what it is.
No.
You came up with a brilliant name for the other
name
one.
that our friend James came up with I quite like as well, so there might be a bit of a fight for it.
Well, arm wrestling might win.
Yeah, that's true.
So we're just talking all the way through your podcast.
So it's fine. We talk all the way through our own podcast all the time. So I'm sure the listeners get tired of hearing us talk every once in a while.
I'm sure all the listeners want is silence.
Just an hour of straight silence. Just 4 minutes and 33 seconds played on loop over and over again.
Yay, we could get sued.
No, but what are your thoughts on Pertwee? I know we had a terrible time getting through his first 2 seasons.
Right. We kind of agreed that he was just not likable for a season and a half at least.
Right.
This is exactly how I felt. He's obnoxious, and he goes around, being terribly rude to everyone and being sort of insufferably arrogant. And after you've had Pat, who's just terribly sweet, and very affectionate towards his companions, and he sort of operates in a sort of state of panic. He's not in control of everything. Pertwee is really terribly unlikable, but the whole thing is kind of mitigated a bit by the fact that Pertwee was my first Doctor, because they used to repeat his stories on the ABC, and so when I was 10, I tuned into Death to the Daleks, and Pertwee does change. You said the first season and a half, so do you think he tones it down?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I personally thought he definitely toned it down a bit, at least very noticeably in his 3rd season.
Going into Day of the Daleks.
Yeah. And, I think part of his portrayal of the Doctor is just, it's his own. It's not really the production team's, so they kind of had to find a middle ground, so to speak. But, because I know he wanted to portray the 3rd Doctor very differently than what the production team wanted.
Yeah, exactly. They were expecting loads of comedy because that's what he was famous for. But, of course, he wanted to branch out as an actor like so many comedians do.
Of course, right.
Yeah. I mean, you see, this is the thing. I was just about to say something, but on our podcast, we sort of sometimes refer to future stories and say, oh, it's a bit like coming up in... And I just realised I really shouldn't do that because I know that you, Kiyan, there's a lot you haven't seen yet, so I stopped myself. I do apologise if I let anything from the future slip.
It's fine.
I'll try and be a bit more riversome.
I make oblique references to the reboot all the time.
Yeah, he does. Minor spoilers are fine.
Anything major, like companion write-outs and Doctor write-outs are off the table.
Yeah,
of course.
No. See, something I kept insisting to Nathan as we were recording our podcast is, no, but the character of the 3rd Doctor is developing. Yes, he starts off really prickly because the keys to his car have been taken away. He's essentially he's like the Fonz without his motorbike. He goes from being urbane and wonderful to being really, really grumpy with everyone until Joe Grant comes along and humanizes him.
Yeah, we think that Joe Grant has a really big role in making him likable, and it is the fact that Pertwee himself clearly loves Katie Manning, and they get on terribly well.
And God, who wouldn't?
She's so fantastic.
I think Dylan mentioned something along those lines too.
A couple of weeks ago, I think. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of there's a give and take. You can definitely, I think, see some character development with Jo as well. She's becoming a little bit more like the Doctor. I mean, she hasn't made that leap to being that overly obnoxious person that,
thank God.
that Pertwee was portraying the Doctor as. But I think you can definitely see there's something going on with her character, in her tenure with the 3rd Doctor.
Yeah, absolutely. And Katie herself has such affection for her time on the program. And if you ever see her interviewed, she gives such insight into what she was thinking when she was playing the character.
She has this sort of manner where she's, crazy, hilarious old lady when she's in an interview, but every so often she just like lowers the mask and lets slip how devastatingly intelligent she is.
Oh,
she's very smart, and she's very, very generous. Do you know what I mean? Like, we've tweeted her a couple of times about the podcast, and she retweets us, invariably and stuff like that.
That's actually a funny story.
And comments.
I'm going to interject with a silly story here. How I found your podcast was actually when I set up my Twitter account because I had to make it for Klaus. One of the first people I followed was Katie Manning, because I wanted to follow a bunch of people that would be interesting. And at one point, she retweeted something that you guys had tweeted at her, and that's how I actually found your podcast. So, silly story just to go along and tie in with the
there you go.
Tie in with the show there.
According to Dylan, she's really active on Twitter.
Yeah, she is actually.
Oh yeah, she really is. And I think also a part of the reason she's kind of noticed our podcast is I went to a convention where she was a guest, and I dressed as her in Day of the Daleks.
I've seen that picture on you guys' website.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, what happens when you put on an outfit? Someone turns up in exactly the same outfit. So there was this lovely girl called Annalise, whose Twitter handle is, I think, Girl on Fire or Girl on Fire 86, off the top of my head. And so we were in the exact same Katie Manning outfit with the same boots.
What was it? It was from Day of the Daleks?
Day of the Daleks. So the little cut-off dungarees, check shirt, red tie. And Katie actually sort of grabbed the trouser leg of my dungarees and said, "What colour underwear are you wearing?" And I said, "White." And she said, "Darling, they were red." Joe always matched her underwear to the outfit. I'm very disappointed, darling.
You do get to see Katie's underwear from time to time, don't you?
Do indeed.
So keep an eye out for that, boys. That's a minor spoiler for you.
We'll have a little ticker for that on the show,
Definitely.
No.
Yeah.
Put it up there with the death count.
Yeah, no, perfect.
They actually change colour halfway through the Time Warrior.
Oh, boy.
Time Monster?
Time Monster.
You're doing it.
No, I'm doing it. They change colour halfway through the Time Monster. They're white for the first 4 episodes, and then they're yellow.
It's really terrifying that he knows that.
Yeah, didn't notice that.
Thank you, Paul Cornell, is what I'll say.
I mean, she matches
what do you
the
think?
outfit.
The book?
Should we leap into the book?
Should we actually discuss the thing we wanted to discuss?
Like, whoa, what a novel concept.
Brilliant. I saw what you did there.
Wow, completely unintentional.
So why did you guys choose Last of the Gaderene?
Well, Dylan chose it, actually, so go ahead.
Wow. Geez, I think, one of the main reasons, first off, that I went with a novel was, you guys are ahead of us in the show, and I didn't want to make you guys retread any old ground that you already done. Plus, branching out could do fun things with it. So I was like, hey, we could do a novel. And then I went on through this epic journey through the multiple ranges of Doctor Who novels to find one that we should read. Looking for one that was also not only considered good, at least in some aspect, but that was also somewhat easily attainable, and...
Not $150 used.
Yes. Did you know Lungbearer is $150 if you want to buy that book used?
Yeah, and you know what? In the UK, it's a similar price, but in pounds.
Right.
So, you're looking at £100 to £150 for a copy of Lungbarrow.
I'm sure I had a copy that I threw out. I feel like a bit of an
throwing away money.
You know what? That's like junking.
Junking the episodes.
Daleks master plan.
Yeah, no, crazy.
Right, but
it was republished, wasn't it, in 2013?
Yes,
they did a series of. Yeah,
they did a series
for
of
the 50th anniversary
books,
including Last of the Gaderene was republished,
right?
Too.
And and they did one for each Doctor, and they published them. And they put new covers on them that made them look halfway passable.
Not the low res original cover.
Did they do Human Nature?
I think Human Nature came in a later range. So this was part of the 50th anniversary range, and they've just done another range which is all historicals, and Human Nature is a part of that.
I only mention that because there's a character named after me in it.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Yeah. It didn't make it to the TV version, spoiler alert, but I'm still pretty cut up about that, actually.
Yeah, because Paul Cornell was spending a lot of time in Australia at that point, wasn't he?
Yeah, we had... we know a little bit about the novel ranges because an old flatmate of mine, Kate Orman, wrote both for the New Adventures and for BBC Books, and wrote really good novels. And she and Paul collaborated on a few, and so Paul came out here, and so Paul's gone on to write 3 episodes for the new series.
Yeah, Father's Day and Human Nature, Family and Blood.
Yeah, and they're all well-regarded, sort of thing. He's really good. And I think he's writing Doctor Who comics and things now.
Yeah, he is. He's working on the Titan comic series. And in fact, he's just announced a 5-issue miniseries, and there's an issue each for the War Doctor 10, 11, 12, and then an issue that brings them all together. And that's going to be coming out in August. It's going to be a weekly series. It'll probably be easier for you guys to get, of course, because Titan Comics is based in the US.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what Paul Cornell's up to now.
Yeah. And we also I discovered earlier today that not only can you buy Last of the Gaderene on Amazon and as an ebook as part of that re-release, but they've just got Richard Franklin, who plays Mike Yates, to record an audiobook version of it. And that's coming out. That's coming out this week.
See, I find that wonderfully bizarre because Yates has bugger all to do with
He does, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mentioned to Dylan, he should have, narrated it in character, and then it was like, wait, most of it would be cut out because he wasn't in the book.
He wasn't there, never found out about it.
Exactly. There's a bit, I'm just trying to find out which chapter it was in, but there's a bit where the Brigadier's like, there's not much I can do at the moment. The Ministry won't allow me to move in, so I'm sending Yates and Benton back to base. And I actually made a note at that point on my copy saying, they haven't done anything yet.
Right.
Why even bring them with you in the first place?
Right,
in terms of the novel writing. Mind you, that's a nitpick because, spoiler alert, I actually really enjoyed this novel.
I kind of did as well.
Yeah, I thought I wouldn't because, possibly controversial, I haven't always been a huge fan of Mark Gatiss's writing in the series. I've enjoyed his more recent stuff under Stephen Moffat a lot more than his Russell T Davies stuff. Right. To me, he's always been a very competent writer. I wouldn't look at any of his stories and say, that's terrible, I don't like it. But they just haven't really grabbed me. But I think this has really grabbed me.
Right. I mean,
will we do a big evaluation at the end? Should we talk through it?
Or we can just throw it in wherever, really. At the end,
I had no expectations going into it because I never even read a Doctor Who novel or anything or watched anything by Mark Gatiss. So you're just throwing that out there. I mean, so.
I think it was a good choice, and it's clearly really fondly remembered. Do you remember? Oh, maybe you don't. Is this a spoiler alert as well? Season 8.
Season 8.
Series 8 rather of the new series has a new title sequence.
Right. Yes. I love the new title sequence. I sort of throw that out there.
Based on something on YouTube, like a concept title sequence that some guy had made up and just thrown up on YouTube, and Moffat clearly liked it and said, let's just do this title sequence. And it's pretty similar. But at the very end, it's Last of the Gaderene by Mark Gatiss is the title of the episode that he made it for.
Yeah. Billy Henshaw, I believe, was his name.
Yes, that was
the original fan artist. Yeah. And the funny thing is, there was another title sequence floating around at the time, which when everyone said, the BBC have chosen a fan title sequence as a basis, everyone thought it was that one by Neon Visual.
Right, yes. I haven't even seen that.
And it wasn't, obviously, but Neon Visual has now done his version of the Series 8 opening titles. And at the beginning, he has a title card saying, based on the work of the BBC and Billy Henshaw.
Okay, nice.
So he's paying tribute to the original artist.
Right.
Yeah, that's not.
Not a hero.
So what did you guys think of the novel?
Immediately upon finishing it, I think I texted Kiyan, like, that wasn't as bad as I thought. And, I mean, that may seem contradictory because I did choose the novel because...
They should put that on the back cover.
Not as bad.
No, but that may seem contradictory because I did choose the novel because it was regarded as being good, but I kind of buy into the stigma that any expanded universe thing for anything ever has to be just absolutely terrible. Like, if there's going to be an expanded universe for something, I buy into the fact that immediately it's going to be terrible. And I came out of this book pleasantly surprised that it wasn't.
You see, Doctor Who has a weird relationship with novels because, it was being screened in the 70s. No one had home video. There was no way of watching a show again.
Yeah.
And Target started releasing novelizations of, like, past stories. And, like, I remember saving my pocket money when I was in primary school and buying whole bunches of them. And, like, I had a huge collection. I had one signed by Tom Baker at one point. And, like, I read and reread them. And I think a lot of people had that experience. Mark Gatiss himself did a documentary, a radio documentary about the Target novels and how important they'd been to him growing up. And they influenced lots of people.
He mentioned it in his foreword too, in the book.
Yeah. In fact, he Terence Dix, who wrote stacks and stacks of them, who is script editor for the stuff that you're watching at the moment, the Pertwee stuff. He wrote heaps and heaps of them, and he did a really good job. He has a very straightforward sort of workmanlike style, and both Paul Cornell in his kind of expanded universe novels, I guess, in the New Adventures that he wrote, and Mark Gatiss are consciously imitating Terence's style, I think. Even to the point where Chapter 5 is called Escape to Danger, which is just, like a famous Dixian kind of episode title. And
I mean, it's the most common chapter title across the whole Target range is Escape to Danger, because Terence Dix was like, if I can't come up with a chapter title that actually relates to what's going on that strongly, Escape to Danger usually covers it. So, and I will admit that when I got up to Chapter 5 and I read Escape to Danger, I made a little note on the side which ended in the word off. But Mark Gatiss was forgiven again for the title of, I think, Chapter 23. Where is it? Chapter 23, which is Fate Worse Than Death.
They've also got Night Takes Bishop.
Night Takes
14.
Bishop.
Yes, I liked that one. But now, how familiar are you guys with the Target novelizations before you came to this? Were you aware that they were a thing?
We knew they were a thing.
I knew they existed. But like I said, Last of the Gaderene was the first Doctor Who novel I'd read ever.
Yeah, same.
Because the Target novels, as far as I know, didn't really make it to the US. About 10 of them were republished by Pinnacle Books in the late 70s, early 80s, and a little bit of language changing. So the bumper of a car became the fender of a car, and they removed the U's from words and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
When I was in America last year, I tried to find them in secondhand bookshops because that's my thing, trying to find Doctor Who books in other languages. I've got all 5 of the Japanese Target novelization translations, which are mostly Pertwees with very scary covers. So it seems mostly, though, to be an Australian and UK experience, the Target novels, because I was very lucky as a kid. I didn't have to buy them because my father had already bought them all. At my parents' place, there's I'm pretty sure he's got about 140 of the 160 that were published, including about 3 copies of Doctor Who and the Mutants and 4 copies of Doctor Who and the Space War.
And
so it's a terrible title.
And Nathan, you mentioned how maybe back in the 70s, if you wanted to sort of relive what you'd seen on the show, the only way to do that would be to read the novels, and I don't think really Dylan and I or our generation can relate to that, because everything's just a few clicks away.
Right.
Well, I mean, we didn't even have VHS tapes then, and for a lot of the Pertwee things, for around this kind of time, my first experience of the stories themselves was as a novel. Like, I'd read novels of stories that I hadn't seen, and the experience with the Pertwee era is, of course, you read the novel first, then you see the show itself, and you're horribly disappointed because the novels are really frequently a lot better. and particularly. The Doctor Who and the Silurians you will have seen, and the Sea Devils. Those novels are vastly better than the TV shows, and much richer and more interesting, and just a bit less crummy looking. Like, my imagination isn't all that great, but it's certainly got a bigger budget than the BBC did in the 1970s, and so everything just looked a bit better.
Yeah,
and those are all available. Like, you can, you can't buy the novels as ebooks generally, although a few were released for the 50th anniversary.
They ended up re-releasing 12.
Okay.
From the first 4 Doctors.
And they're released on audible.com, and so I've just finished reading Tom Baker reading the novelisation of his first story, which was really marvellous, and Katie Manning, you're doing Carnival of Monsters, I think. Katie Manning reads the novelisation of that, and she's fantastic. She does the best impersonation of Joe Grant I've ever heard. She's really incredible. Really something. Genius, just genius. And Liz Shaw, Caroline John, reading Doctor Who and the Silurians, which they call Doctor Who and the Cave Monsters. She does a superb Pertwee impersonation, which is really fun to listen to as well.
Yeah, and also she does really good Silurians.
Yeah, she does. And the audiobooks have great, because, people who are inspired somehow by this podcast to go out and find the Gaderene book, Last of the Gaderene, there'll be an audiobook by then, and the production values are really high, and there's incidental music and voice treatments and all sorts of things. So they're pretty fun. They're a good way of experiencing stories while you're walking the dog or doing the ironing or something like that.
Something I did find, because I came to Doctor Who in the late 80s when I was about 5. So in the 90s, when Doctor Who wasn't being made anymore, but there were these books about.
Right.
But the books were being written for an adult audience. So when I tried to read them as a 12-year-old, they didn't engage me, because writing for an adult audience, they were written often quite nastily, lots of gratuitous drugs and swearing, and just, for me, that wasn't Doctor Who. But one of the big things with these past Doctor adventures that could kind of really take me out of the moment is if they wrote something in the novel that I couldn't imagine in the style of the way the program was produced. So if there was a sort of giant monster phasing in and out of existence kind of thing. I think there was one book, Doctor Who, The Menagerie, which is a second Doctor Jamie Zoe book. And in the first few chapters, there were just so many things that I couldn't imagine in a black and white production in a BBC studio. I just didn't want to read the rest of the book. It's like, no, this isn't right. You can do new things with the characters, but you have to sort of have enough. Maybe I was just being a pretentious child. I don't know. I should go back and try and read it again. But I found with this book, I could imagine this as a Pertwee 4 or 6-parter. I could imagine it actually happening. I could imagine the CSO with the monsters.
Right.
But at the same time, it does feel like it's one of their big budget stories that they save the money for, and it has really great model work.
Like the Time Monster.
Like the Time Monster. Or possibly the Daemons or the Green Death.
Well, I think while reading it, Dylan and I, we sort of both almost went in the opposite direction, because, we're obviously a lot younger than you guys, and we're not exactly used to the production values from, back in the 70s, or just how they had to produce TV back then. So I know I mentioned to Dylan, I'm imagining this as like a multi-billion-dollar production. And Dylan was like, that's how I read it too. And that's what was going through my mind, just reading all the action scenes at the end and everything.
Yeah, especially the end.
That's good though. That's true. Yeah, the end is very big. The end is very big, and the sequence in the wind tunnel is very big as well.
Do we want to go ahead and start explaining the plot then? Before we begin, can we start with that Bible quote that's like right there on the first page? I don't know if your version has it, but I mean the version we were reading. The Bible quote where Jesus said unto him.
Epigraph.
Yeah, come out.
So, do you know this story?
I don't actually, but I didn't actually understand why the quote was there until I had finished the book. And I completely forgotten it existed. When I let Kiyan the book, he's like, oh, there's just this quote at the beginning. I was like, oh, wait, I remember that now. And then that's when I got it, when I had finished the book. Because it's not immediately obvious why it's there.
Except that the title of the book, because this is a thing from the Gospel. Jesus comes to a place called Gadara, and so the people there are Gadarenes.
Ah, see, I didn't know this.
I didn't know this.
And there's a guy. There's actually two versions in two different Gospels, and there's a guy or two guys, depending on which Gospel you read, who they live outside the city or whatever, and they're naked and they cut themselves with stones and they're clearly crazy. And Jesus comes up to them, and it turns out that this guy or guys are inhabited by millions of demons. Do you know what I mean? And they say, Jesus says, what's your name? And they say, we're called Legion. So that's what Legion International comes from.
Right.
For we are many. And then Jesus casts the demons out into a herd of pigs that is grazing nearby, which is hence the word swine, which keeps coming up.
Yes.
That we'll get to later. And the pigs all just hurl themselves into the lake and drown. And so, that's that. And so that's where he's getting the name from. I always thought it was really hard on the guy who owned the pigs, though. Do you know what I mean? I would hope that Jesus had compensated him in some way with some loaves and fishes or something. You know what I mean? Just fair, I think that would be fair. But it's a story. And again, Mark Gatiss is someone who is, really aware of mid-20th century culture and inhabits mentally a time where everyone in England went to church, would go to the Church of England and hear the Bible read and stuff. So it's no surprise that, that he's riffing on that, and certainly the whole plot, is in some way reflected by that quote.
Right.
So there you go, fact fan.
There you go.
I wasn't aware of that either, and it's a sign of a good writer if they can take an old story and put a new slant on it, and either you can be aware of the old story and thus enjoy all the references in the new story, or if you're not aware of the old story, it doesn't matter because the new story stands on its own.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So wow, that's really interesting. I mean, that's far more interesting than the name connection I have, which we'll get into later.
So where does the plot begin? Does it begin with the scene of Joe on the unit rooftop?
No, it begins with Whistler.
There's the scene with Whistler. There's the introduction with Whistler
in the RAF base. Yes,
right.
In the prologue.
The prologue sort of haunts him for the entire time.
Yeah, as I was reading through the book, I sort of just kept 2 or 3 bullet points per chapter. Now, the prologue only has one bullet point, which is Alec, an RAF pilot, proposes to his girlfriend, who is then blown up.
Yes. Accurate.
Which kind of ties into a quotation which has been attributed to many people on the New Who production team, and this isn't really a spoiler. I believe it was Stephen Moffat said it to Russell T Davies, and Russell T Davies has since used it. The thing about your scripts is you love creating interesting, likable characters and then melting them. And that's exactly what Mark Gatiss does in this prologue, and it automatically gives us this sympathy for Alec Whistler,
right?
The RAF pilot who we then later meet 30, 40 years later, depending on the dating method.
Right.
You haven't discovered unit dating yet.
I know of it, but
treat.
we have not got to that point yet where that's going to be a problem.
Just best not to
That's
think
going to be
about
a problem. Oh, boy.
It's okay.
It's okay. It's okay.
But there is something that Brendan's deft summary of the prologue left out, which is that that Alec goes back to visit the ruins of the pub and picks up a jade crystal.
Yes.
Which will become important. And
I'm sure that won't show up later.
Yeah, and there's something lurking, sleeping beneath the ground.
I still don't know what that is. I think I've just worked it out.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes, you have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we can always go over when we get there still a problem. But anyway, so continuing.
So sort of, 30, 40 years later in the village of Culverton, various villagers sort of meet dark and sinister shapes, and a company moves into the local aerodrome. Joe is sunbathing on the roof of Unit HQ because nothing's going on.
Oh, can we talk about that? I think that's lovely.
Oh, please.
What did you guys think of that scene? Is that where we are?
Yeah, that is where we are. I think that is where we are. Yes. That's right at the beginning. Joe is just hanging out on the roof.
Well, I liked, and I mean, since this was the first Doctor Who novel I've read, I was, pleasantly surprised by how accurate all the characterization was. Just little things that said, Joe flicked her bangs out of her eyes, or the Doctor pressed his hands to his lips, and I was like, I can see them doing this. This is what they do on the program, and I honestly didn't think. I didn't expect the characters to be out of character, but at the same time, I didn't expect the characterization to be so
on point.
Yeah, on point.
This is Gatiss writing for the Doctor that he absolutely adores, and for the era of the show that he knows. And we've picked over these stories so many times that we have special names. Like there's the Pertwee death pose, which is when he's lying on the ground with one knee in the air, and he's constantly scratching, like rubbing the back of his neck, and scratching his chin. And some cruel people say that that's a substitute for kind of an acting performance. But I would never say that. But those are...
it's like some people do stroke their chin. I quite often stroke my chin when I'm thinking. I catch myself doing it and think, that looks slightly ridiculous, please stop. But people do have their physical tics and mannerisms.
Yeah.
And I think it's acting shorthand. It's kind of... Actors will often think, okay, how is my character going to stand? Right, my character will always shift their weight to their right-hand side, and it becomes a habit. So instead of thinking about that, they're thinking about how they're going to deliver the lines. Right. But you're absolutely right, guys, in that the characters are so well written, and it's very easy to tell in any sort of tie-in novel. Those mannerisms, they're sort of something intangible. When they're there, you kind of go, oh, yeah, that's right, that's the character. And when they're not there, it is so jarring and can draw you out of the book so easily. Right. I actually find that with some Star Trek books, which I've tried to start reading, and I sort of get a few pages in, it's like, no, sorry, Jean-Luc Picard wouldn't do that.
Right.
And it's just like, throw the book across the room and say it's not worthy of the logo, that kind of thing. Flip a table.
So, and one of the other elements that's introduced here is summer, and I think it gives a really great coherent atmosphere to the whole story. It's really hot. The Brigadier's sweating in his uniform. Joe's gone up to the roof and is sunbaking in a bikini when and like big sunglasses and stuff when Benton comes up to talk to her. I think that's right, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
But all the way through, it's really warm, and people enjoy sort of even, the terrible besieged village of Culverton. People enjoy walking on the village green at nights and all of that sort of thing. And I think, that's a touch that you wouldn't be able to do in a TV show, I think, or that they wouldn't have thought to do probably in the 1970s. But here it creates a real atmosphere, which I really like. Is it possible that Doctor Who wasn't on over summer, and that's why they said it?
Doctor Who tended to start in the winter at this point and run through until, let's see, it was on 26 weeks. It would run through just to the beginning of summer.
Yeah.
Right.
And also, I'm pretty sure that in the prologue, it's a summer's night as well. So we got that link to the past there. Going back to the prologue for just a second, because there's something I forgot to mention. Alex's doomed sweetheart is Alice Faye, F-E-Y. In the late 30s, early 1940s, Fox Studios in America had a starlet called Alice Faye, F-A-Y-E. Alice Faye eventually sort of didn't have as much time to do movies, and in 1943, I think. Actually, sorry, I'm not sure of the exact year, but she turned down the leading role in a film called Down Argentine Way because she was sick, and was replaced by Betty Grable, who is the pin-up Alec later sees in the air hangar as an old calendar on the wall. And Fox Studios built up this massive rivalry between Alice Faye and Betty Grable. Mm-hmm. But Alice Faye said in later years, no, we were the best of friends, but it was just good for publicity that people thought we hated each other because she was replacing me. So that as soon as
this is the sort of thing we do on our podcast all the time. It may sound strange and tangential to you, but it's very central to what we're about.
Well, when you look at Mark Gatiss's other writing, especially The League of Gentlemen, where characters often have some sort of descriptive element to their name or poetic justice to their name, what have you, it wouldn't surprise me at all if the choice of these two names was quite deliberate.
Oh, it has to be. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, who else is your 1940s hero going to be dating but a proxy for one of the big movie stars of the time? Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it's just that sort of little attention to detail. Again, if you don't know it, you don't miss out. But if you do know it, you kind of go, I see what you did there.
Right. I mean, like you didn't, like we didn't.
No. Well, yeah. I'm just a bit anally retentive. That's all.
That's fine. So where do we go from there?
Well, Culverton is it's set near this marsh, and I thought there was another, in addition to the whole summer thing, I thought there was another sort of running motif to this book where everyone just gets muddy and dirty all the time, and it starts actually not even on Earth. When in that whole episode with Gogon, where the doctor,
that's true.
He just rushes into the water, and there's all this imagery where everyone just gets. There's no better term for it, but just muddy all the time, and it's prevalent throughout the whole book. So,
what did you think of the Gogon thing? So it's like the doctor is off. Like Benton goes up to tell. Doesn't Benton go up?
Yeah, Benton goes up to fetch Joe because the Brigadier wants to see Joe because the doctor's buggered off somewhere.
Right,
and so he's off on another planet, like an upcoming story, which I'm not going to spoil you about, but it is a reference to a later Pertwee, I think. But like, what did you think of that Gogon and that whole plot?
Well, I just thought, perhaps it was a story Mark Gatiss didn't think he could fully flesh out into a full novel or full story. So, just threw in a little portion of it in here, because something like that.
It also gives the reader, just say they're coming to this character for the first time, similar to how you're coming to Doctor Who novels for the first time, Kiyan. It gives the reader an immediate sense that the Doctor is a hero. Mm-hmm. Right. But at the same time, he's an unconventional hero because he's gone away and not told his friends where he's going. So we find that out. But then we find out the reason he's doing that is he's freeing this entire planet from a tyrant. Right. In fact, his actions in this kind of remind me of William Shatner as Captain Kirk in early Star Trek, where he would turn up on a planet and solve an entire solution by punching someone into the dirt. It's a very Western film trope, one might say. But no, I think it's a very strong establishment for the character, and it starts this whole thing of paying tribute to the Pertwee era. So, okay, Pertwee has to get into a fist fight. Tick. That's done.
Definitely.
Pertwee has to give some lovely speeches, such as pointing to the gun and saying, "Tell you what, as soon as you can, get rid of that." He gets to give his speeches about don't give in until Why am I not able to speak properly, gentlemen? I do apologise. But, don't repeat the same mistakes as him. He ruled by force. You don't have to rule by force. Yeah, that kind of thing.
I guess that's it. I kind of, because Gogon gets a mention later on, but really that part of the plot kind of sinks without trace, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a throwaway. It's a throwaway. But at the same time, it all, because when the Doctor does refer back to Gogon in the novel, you know, he could say, for instance, oh, this is, you know, it's like dealing with the Marshal above the planet Solos, which to many readers may not mean anything.
Yeah.
Whereas in this case, the reader can go, oh, I remember that from a few days ago when I was reading that. You know, it's a device. You know, it's just a plot device, but I think it's effectively written. It's not just dashed out there for no reason.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Sorry.
I agree on all points. No points of contention there. What happens immediately following that? Oh, right, Pertwee
turns into a small town mystery with the brave Alec Whistler and his young sidekick snooping around.
Young sidekick Noah.
This is some of the stuff that I can easily imagine on telly. Do you know what I mean? Because it's so much like the Demons, isn't it? You know, like you've got a village green and little villages and stuff. And Gatiss likes that sort of stuff. And the Demons is really well regarded and fondly remembered. And so setting it in a little sleepy English village is kind of the obvious thing to do. And so it's invaded by, you know, villains who are sometimes explicitly kind of compared to, you know, black shirts and fascists and things. You know, are they driving big black lorries into the village and you know, reversing over the village green and you know, endangering the citizenry and that kind of thing.
Right.
Posing as a airline company a la Faceless Ones.
One of your favorite serials?
Yes, Chameleon Tours. The funny thing is for me reading these segments is my other half is really hugely into Midsummer Murders. And so that is how I imagine these scenes of Alec and Noah wandering about the village with the little saxophone music you get in. Sorry, it's clarinet music you get in Midsummer Murders. Do, 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 do. And there's an actor called Leslie Phillips, who's quite a famous British character actor, and that's who I imagine playing Alec. And he was also on the list occasionally to become the Doctor as well, because in the 60s he was a bit of a movie heartthrob, but in an unexpected way, because he was actually very fair and gentlemanly and what have you, and very plummy. But, you know, now he's sort of that, but in his 60s, just like Alec is in this. And that's sort of how I imagine. He's the face I imagine when I imagine Alec.
That's interesting. I just imagined Whistler as Mark Twain. Believe it or not.
Good choice. Good choice.
And
good choice, actually, yeah.
You know, usually when I'm reading, when a new character, any book really, and a new character is introduced, I'll, you know, take 10 seconds or so and just try and visualize them. But for Whistler, it was just Mark Twain immediately. Well, when he showed up as an old man.
There would have been dueling hair between him and Pertwee, who could have the biggest shock of white hair.
Well, yeah, I mean, they don't meet until
the last chapter.
They meet in the final chapter.
Yeah, well, actually, yeah, sorry, you're right. They do meet briefly in the last chapter, so we don't have to worry too much about the Battle of the Buffon.
Yes.
A few years ago, a fanzine here published an article on how Pertwee's hair becomes more and more bouffant as he progresses as the Doctor.
Oh yeah, that's a spoiler. Sorry, guys.
I think we've kind of seen that trend a little bit.
The book describes it as a mane of white hair.
The thing is, the stunt double's hair doesn't.
Yes. And you are also coming up on a story wherein John Pertwee became soaked by, I believe, a sudden downpour or some stunt gone wrong, and had to go to a local army base to dry out. So the army commander walks into a barracks, and there's Doctor Who sitting in his long johns with his feet up, with his hair in curlers. Because his hair had just become flattened onto his head and they need to flump it up. God, sorry, we're tangential.
Jeez. No, it's fine. We always go on tangents. So the doctor shows up, he talks with Joe for a bit, right? Yeah, he just shows back up.
They're suspicious, as they should be.
Suspicious as to where the doctor went. At first, the doctor, as usual in Pertwee's era, doesn't want to help the Brigadier with whatever problem he's brought up this week and dug out of the hole for the doctor to go and investigate. But eventually he caves.
Especially now, he's got the keys to his car back.
Right.
He doesn't. It's like I don't have to be here. You're not my real dad. And I mean, the thing is, this is where I did have a few problems with the novel, and this is something we've discussed in the podcast as well. So it is kind of appropriate for this period in the Pertwee era that the Brigadier looks like a bit of an idiot.
Right.
Sort of when the doctor gets back, the Brigadier says, "Oh, it's good that you're here. Something's just come up." Meanwhile, the Brigadier's just had all the men out on parade in the summer heat because he's bored. Obviously, I can't go investigate this thing myself. I'll just make everyone parade around in their uniforms in this 30 degrees Celsius heat. Sort of 100 degree Fahrenheit heat. I'll just let them do all that because I'm bored and I don't have anything else to do. There's a later point where Joe says to the doctor, "I don't think the Brigadier would know quite what to do to himself if you weren't there. For God's sake, he made the rank of Colonel all by himself. I think he can find something to do." Aside from parading his men up and down and getting them all sweaty, but this is not the place for that discussion. Captain Yates.
So how was the doctor persuaded to go? Can you remember?
I think the brig mentions something about Legion International. That piques the doctor's interest.
The name alone is
you're right.
What gets him into it.
He must have read the Bible.
Unlike most of us on the show
there
right
is,
now.
There is a Pertwee novelization where there's an epilogue where he reads a chapter from the Bible to try and explain, to give an example about time travel.
Mm-hmm.
The dinosaur invasion.
I wasn't going to spoil it for them.
It's fine.
Show.
That's true. But yeah, so, there's a bit of familiarity there. And, of course, the Doomsday Weapon, which is based on Colony in Space.
Right.
Ash, the leader of the colony in the novelization, has this book about a character called Goad, and he particularly likes the story of Job, but he doesn't understand the relevance of the Bible, and then the doctor has to guide him through the funeral rites and what have you.
No, there's a lovely thing in that where it's Ash.
Oh, no, it is
Ash is inspired to lay down his life for his friends by the stories, the gospel
absolutely.
stories.
Oh, yeah, but I'm just saying, Pertwee knowing about the Bible in this actually has sort of little tiny precedents in the Target novelizations, which Mark Gatiss has said many times are what inspired him to become a writer.
At this point, I guess he...
So where
are we in the plot? Wow, I read this book like 2 weeks ago. I guess he hops into Bessie, as is also usual for this era of story. He drives on down to Culverton, and then, this is where the real fun begins, when he first interacts with the villagers and...
Right, Whistler's already been kidnapped and interrogated.
Right.
He spends most of the book captive or sneaking around trying to get out. It just doesn't work out for him.
He has a bad time, doesn't he? It's not a great day for Ali.
Yeah, he's at this point, he's kind of a British Rambo, because he gets abducted once and interrogated and beaten up and then escapes, and then he gets abducted and then he gets recaught and possessed,
right,
and then he gets unpossessed and beaten up and interrogated, and then he manages to free himself, gets beaten up, and then goes up in a Spitfire.
Right.
Yeah, he's tough. For an old guy.
I think we need one of those videos. Like, there's a video online which shows you how many lives Bruce Willis's John McClane would have needed to make it through all the Die Hard movies. And I think he's injured enough to die 23 times. And Alec is 60. He's brilliant. We like Alec.
Yeah.
So have we talked about what the Legion guys look like? Because that's kind of a thing, isn't it? Like,
as you said earlier, they're sort of black shirts
right, the
and
black uniforms,
smiling constantly.
the black
They
everything.
never really explain why they're smiling constantly, but it's really unnerving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and
The
they've got black
spittle dribbling
eyes.
down
Yeah.
their chins.
Yeah. The most unnerving one I found was Constable Trickett and his wife Helen and their daughter Nicola and their reactions to him.
Right.
That's what really sold the body horror aspect for me. And it's something you don't much see in Doctor Who when there's possession narratives. You might have someone say, oh, he's acting a bit strangely, but that's really just to inform the Doctor. Whereas these three characters never meet the Doctor. This is pretty much just for the reader to experience the horror of this. And I think it's very effective.
Yeah, definitely. I know when I was reading it, I was surprised that they kind of went for that, not as, what's the wording like for, the kind of more horror vibe than the TV show would have gone for in this era. Especially, with the scene where McGarrigle, dies, and then the Gaderene inside him goes out, and then it gets into Whistler. Like, that whole scene was just kind of uncomfortable, I guess, to read a little bit.
Yeah.
Or the the one where I think it's Ted or Max, I forget who, finds Trickett, and he thinks he's dead in the chair, and he turns around and sees his wide smile, Or,
That's great. That's
That was so creepy.
very clever.
So creepy.
And that's very Gatiss too, because Gatiss grew up on Hammer horror films and all sorts of things, and there's all elements of horror all the way through, like League of Gentlemen and stuff. That struck me as a really Gatissy scene, and it's really, really effective, because I think the guy like Bishop, when he's turning it around, expects there to be like a gunshot hole in
He thinks
Triggett's head.
he must be dead. Yeah, because he's so dedicated to duty that he wouldn't let a call for help go ignored. So, oh God, something horrible's happened. He's dead, and it without using the cliched words of a fate worse than death, because they're saving it for a chapter title. We see that it's a fate worse than death because we think he's dead, but then we find out it's worse.
Dun dun.
So they
Dun, dun, dun.
dun, dun. So it show don't tell, which makes up for I think earlier when Joby gets attacked, it's something like, but a few minutes later Joby was attacked, and I just went, that's really cheap. You spent 3 pages setting up this really likable sort of old man handyman character, and then at that point I thought he was dead, and then you kill him off screen like Bela Lugosi in Plan 9 from Outer Space. It's just, but of course it had a purpose. This novel made me very angry in the first few chapters before I realised that it was being written in a very deliberate, evocative style.
Right.
Because with other Doctor Who novels I've read, a lot of them, as I said earlier, don't try and evoke the style of the period, whereas this one firmly does. And it wasn't until I realised that I thought, okay, it's meant to be like a little bit stilted and a little bit awkward in its metaphors, because it's mimicking that sort of thing where Terrance Dicks had to punch out 3 books in a week.
I think it's definitely written as a story that could have aired in this era but wasn't. Like, there's an alternate universe where this aired as a television show instead of something else, and we got it as a TV episode rather than a book.
Well, I think if it were a TV serial, the book is able to establish this town and these characters a lot more than you would have been able to on TV, because Culverton has all these, interesting characters. There's the relationship with, Ted, Max, Noah, and, they're setting up the fate and everything. And there's the 2 kids, I forget their names, Graham and the other one.
And,
The guy
I actually,
the bully.
when I was making my notes, I gave a different color to each thing, and yellow is characters. And Anthony.
Yeah, Graham and Anthony, they have their whole dynamic going on, and there's Whistler. He's sort of like the old vet who came to settle down here in the small town, and it was just interesting. And I didn't think this would have been able. Well, I don't think it would have been as fleshed out as a TV serial.
No, and I like that. I really like the cast of characters in the village, and you get to meet the vicar, and you get to hear what Whistler thinks of the vicar, and like all of those things.
No, Spencer door in his face. I love that.
It's all of that's really fun, and one of the advantages I think of the novel over a TV show, where you'll only have a couple of speaking parts and stuff, particularly when you've got a big cast, a big regular cast like the show does at this point.
Yeah, and it means that when these characters are one by one sort of picked off and taken over, you actually care.
Right.
So if we were to look at, say, the Damons, there's a point in there, and I can't even remember the name of the character. I think he's the town squire, and when he rallies against the master, Bok attacks him, and it's just like
Win Stanley.
Win Stanley, and you're more sorry that you've lost a character with such an interesting name than you actually feel for the character. Whereas here, when they set up the characters and then they're not them anymore. It's very palpable. I did make a note after. I think Max is the more sort of flamboyant brother who wanted to be an actor.
Yeah.
He puts on amateur theatre and stuff, and he's married and doesn't have kids.
Yeah,
I just sort of thought.
Yeah, it's very. It's code. It's code.
His dream show.
When he's sort of introduced, at one point he says, like, he's complaining about his brother and his layabout nephew, and there's a line like, "Oh, what a life!" And the note I put next to that was, "This is a sitcom setup, so he's obviously dead." And sure enough. I believe he gets possessed first, doesn't he? And then Ted gets possessed after that.
Yeah, right.
But, he actually gets possessed because he tries to do something heroic for the first time in his life.
Right.
He tries to go get the police officer and ends up as a zombie.
And
what about
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Well, one of the things that I thought wasn't like the TV show was, and something that the Doctor Who novels used to do a lot, and maybe too much, was they would introduce lots of different sort of plot threads and then leave it to the very end of the novel to explain. And you have to keep all of these things going. So there's the minister, the new Minister of Defence,
right?
Who gets blackmailed.
Coltrane. Yeah, I just wanted to mention I couldn't just stop thinking of John Coltrane.
But there's photos of him, and then he goes and pays money, and then gets possessed, and then it becomes clear at the very end that the photos are probably of him in women's underwear in a hotel room. Although it's a bit subtle, because it's Doctor Who novel. And
of course.
And then there's all that stuff in italics about some strange monster on an alien planet. Remember that?
The Gaderene.
Yeah, the Gaderene.
To be honest, I skimmed over most of those because I actually thought to myself, this will all be explained at the end anyway.
Yeah, it's this kind of irritating thing. And then there's the Chief of Staff and all of that. And eventually all sort of comes together. But it sort of tries your patience a bit. And those are the things that I think the show wouldn't do. Like, the show is a little bit more focused than that. And it certainly wouldn't introduce something in episode 1 that would only be paid off in episode 6. We just never remember it.
I mean, I think what does help with the Strangeways character and the Cochrane character is that the Brigadier, if not by name, is referring to them occasionally. I spoke to the Minister. Seems the minister, and I really like. It seems the minister has disappeared, but his deputy is rather more sensible. So I'm bringing up some men. It's like, we have another Pertwee trope here. We have the obstruction. We have the obstructional civil servant slash minister. And in this case, it's not because he's a selfish idiot. It's because he's been... Well, in a way, he is a selfish idiot because he only gets possessed because he gives in to blackmail, and he's only doing that to save his career. So,
Yeah.
But I quite liked his introduction. He's introduced as ineffectual straight away because the phone rings, but he spends about 5 more minutes doing his nails and then answers the phone.
Right.
And there's a lot of nails. I think that Max is very well manicured a couple of times as well.
I'm sure the Gaderene keep their claws nice and tidy too. No.
Almost certainly. And that was the other thing too that I thought would never happen, and something that, like, particularly in the 90s, Doctor Who novels wanted to be really grim, dark, and kind of grown up and scary, and have lots of horrible dismemberment and stuff. And so these sort of creepy slug, worm, crab, monster things that are inside people's mouths. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
you would never, ever have had that in a million years in the Pertwee era, which is much more family friendly. And it's not until the next producer takes over that you get the kind of horror that you get here. And of course, you'd never get anything, because they would never have been able to realise it, but nothing as gory as,
Yeah.
you know, these big, scary, segmented worm monster things.
And I actually did notice that while reading it. I said to myself, "This is a lot more violent than something
Right.
I would see watching the show." And the main scene that stood out to me was the wind tunnel, where the Legion
Right.
Yes.
soldier gets sucked into the fans and
there's
blood drips on the
The
tiles.
raining of the blood on Pertwee.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a great scene, that. And I love the way, like, it's just the last sentence of the scene, the blood starts dripping down from the ceiling as the Doctor walks away.
Yeah, and I really like the way they've written Pertwee's desperation in there, because it captures, because his character always has this sort of awkwardness, which depending on where you guys are up to, you guys are sort of partway through season 10. By that point, it hasn't really been addressed in the program, where he's sort of he's anti-war and anti-weapons and whatnot, but he still beats people up. And that scene in the wind tunnel actually plays that very well, because, he hits the guard just to get him off him. But when he realizes the guard is in danger, he pleads with the guard to save his own life. Rather than just kicking him into the wind tunnel and saying, "Hell is dark, enjoy it." And, he's very shaken afterwards. And I thought that then was done very well. I think, I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it's a later Doctor Who scriptwriter who was quite often criticised for the violence in his scripts. He tried to justify the violence by saying, we always show the consequence. If you're going to show violence in a story, you must always show the consequence of that violence. And that's something which happened here, which arguably doesn't happen the other times when the Doctor beats someone up on the TV show.
Right.
They don't show someone the Doctor's beaten up recovering from a broken leg in hospital. They don't show
That'd be great, though.
They don't show poor Varan in the mutants spontaneously decompressing in that amazing spontaneous
That scene was
decompression scene from the mutants. Yes.
I'd love to hear what you guys had to say about that.
for that scene. That specific
Dylan,
scene, I hated that scene. The scene made no
I
sense.
loved it.
So terrible. And then the Marshal just walks off.
Yeah.
There's a gaping hole in the wall. The Marshal just wanders away.
They just stand up
Anyway.
and walk out of this open airlock.
That's why I loved it, though.
We'll leave that discussion for another episode. I bet it's already happened. Oh, jeez. Should we talk about the monster showing up? I think that's about where we are now.
We should talk about the master showing
the
up.
monsters.
So,
Before the Master shows up, we have to talk about one thing, which is, remember Noah runs into something mysterious in the marsh,
right.
and then he comes back.
Right.
Oh, yes.
Shaken, rattled by it.
But he has what we've discovered on Flight Through Entirety is called an exposition coma, where he's unconscious, but he's uttering dialogue that's important to the furthering of the plot, and so he shouts about having encountered a monster.
Yes, and he just so happens to shout it after the Doctor's arrived and can hear it. He hasn't said it to anyone else earlier. It's just once the Doctor arrived. And this kind of thing pops up in the Pertwee era a lot. It's usually Pertwee doing it. So in Inferno, for instance, he's saying, "Number 2, output pipe." Number 2,
Very dangerous.
very dangerous. Bill Filer must not distribute accident.
Yeah, I think we actually mentioned that in our
Kronos.
episode for that.
Yeah. So it's another tick. It's another Pertwee trope tick So
Right.
the Doctor gets to have a fight with someone. He gets to be rude to the Brigadier. He calls the Brigadier an idiot. There's a civil servant getting in the way of solving the plot. And then, yes, as you mentioned, and we can now move on to the Master shows up.
Did you expect him?
Not at all.
No. And
It was actually really well done.
I was surprised they didn't just blatantly telegraph it. You know, you would assume, okay, if the Master's going to show up, they'd probably just, slap his face right on the cover. But no, I was actually surprised that they didn't go for that.
Yeah, it was really, really well done because when I think there is a red herring for it earlier in the novel because Alec mentions the new vicar.
Mm-hmm.
And I made a note.
Oh, it's Mr. Magister.
Yeah.
I made a note that, it better not be the Master. But then it's Stephen Darnell, and I'm looking at the name. Darnell. That doesn't sound like an obvious
Master
unit.
wordplay there.
So it can't be. And of course, the Master then turns up as Inspector Lemaitre.
Right. French for the Masters.
Exactly.
I was listening to you guys talk about the Time Monster last week, and pointing out that the Master is really bad at choosing his allies, and so he always, do you know what I mean? He always teams up with aliens who then decide that they can kind of dispose of him, and it's never really occurred to him that that's going to be a thing. And so the Master gets to do that here, doesn't he?
Yes.
So he's teamed up with Bliss, who we haven't mentioned, who is the sort of scary... is the scary lady who runs Legion International, and she's sort of horribly possessed.
I actually expected the twist would be that she would be Alice. That Alice wasn't killed in the bomb, but had been possessed.
See, I thought Alice was going to turn out to be Mrs. Tuvey somehow. Because she turned, she turned the ring and all that, and when she was with Whistler. Everything, but that never went anywhere.
No.
She does like someone though, doesn't she? Phone? Who does she phone?
She likes Alec. She phones the bishops.
Yeah, she phones the bishops.
But she has a bit of a flame for Alec going on.
Yeah, she's sweet. I love those characters. That is a really great thing, isn't it? The village characters.
Right. Yeah, I love Mrs. To Be. Fantastic.
And like you mentioned before, Brendan, when the brig is almost about to run them over, you actually feel something for these characters.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good scene too, isn't it? So Mike, they're invading the aerodrome, and the Gaderene have all these possessed people surrounding the aerodrome, just villagers. And all of the second half where the villagers have all been turned into zombies during the fate, they've all been possessed. Now suddenly the fate worse than death. Now suddenly we have, we can't kill the villains. We can't use guns against them because the villains are just people being possessed. And so the Brigadier takes over from Mike, doesn't he? Like Mike is supposed to drive through.
The Brigadier says he wouldn't let Mike do anything that he wouldn't do himself. So he's going to do it for him. Which I actually...
He didn't offer to take... didn't offer to take Joe out for a night on the town.
Well, Joe's got her own thing going on.
At this point, I believe behind the scenes, the Brigadier is still married to Fiona, who was meant to appear in the Daemons but didn't. Just out of curiosity, guys, which season 10 story are you currently up to?
We just watched Carnival of Monsters.
Just finished Carnival of Monsters.
Oh, okay. I will say that there are elements of Yates's characterization that I think you will find relevant the next time he appears. So the way Mark Gatiss has written Yates here is tying in with his upcoming appearance. I can't say how exactly, but yeah. So that's despite the fact that Yates isn't used very much, just those few lines in the Jeep really are going to become quite relevant a bit further down the line, in my opinion, because this novel is set between Planet of the Daleks and the Green Death, according to the Mark Gatiss.
The back of the novel.
According to the back. I got, despite the fact I didn't read these novels very much, towards the sort of midway through the run of the BBC books in the late 90s, early 2000s, they stopped putting the story placements on the back of them.
Mm-hmm.
And despite the fact I didn't read them, that really annoyed the sort of the sort of scarf-wearing fanatical completist in me. It's like, if I ever have the money to buy these books, I won't know where to put them on my shelf.
I think it'll just have to come down to you'll have to read it and then figure out for yourself where it goes, right?
Well, that's not good enough, damn it. Do it for me, BBC.
Well, I mean, the thing about this one is that it says that it's set between, Planet of the Daleks and the Green Death, and I think, neither myself nor Kiyan can confirm this, but I don't think there's anything explicitly setting it there besides the fact that it has to be after the Three Doctors because the Doctor has control of his TARDIS again. Unless there's some reference to either Planet of the Daleks or what do we have next week, Frontier in Space?
Yeah.
That we obviously wouldn't catch.
Yeah, like
there's one very, very oblique reference to Planet of the Daleks, which could also be a reference to Day of the Daleks. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, she knows about the Daleks, but there is also, and again, the big thing that this does to sort of continuity is something that neither of us can talk to you about because you haven't seen it yet. So when you have watched, when you know a little bit more about the kind of history of this era, when you've watched the rest of the era, there is something that this story does that's really, really important to continuity, and which I think, so that's why I think it definitely has to be between Planet of the Daleks and Green Death. There's nowhere else to set it. So, spoiler alert.
I know what you guys are talking about. Dylan doesn't.
I have a feeling I know what's coming, but I won't say it. I have a feeling. But yes, obviously the monster shows up is clearly also a trope of this era of, Doctor Who with Pertwee facing off against his arch nemesis, and going at it.
I liked that though the Masters showed up, the Gaderene weren't sort of relegated to villain of the week
character
that the Master's controlling. Yeah, exactly. Not like the reappearance of the Sea Devils, where they didn't really flesh out the Silurians anymore. They were just a force for the Master to control, sort of. They kind of did near the end.
Yeah. But. Yeah, they're a bit more like the Axons in that they still had their own agenda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And as we were saying earlier, Bliss is a very, very good character, and of course slightly sympathetic because her world is dying. Mm-hmm. But at the same, and the interesting thing is we've already had one character introduced, Mrs. Tuvey, who is referred to as pleasantly having a pleasant plumpness. Mm-hmm. I believe is how she's described. So Bliss, sort of visually in your mind's eye, is a counterpoint to that. She's described in very similar terms. She's very curvy and plump as well, and is of a similar age to Mrs. Tuvey. So it sort of makes us second guess a bit. Is she a villain? How can she be a villain? She sounds like this other character we really like. And so her villainy, instead of being this immediate, you're going to be evil, we kind of think, you're probably going to be evil. But at the same time, it means that when her villainy builds up, instead of just sitting here going, I expected that, it actually becomes rather surprising the kind of lengths she will go to. Like, I was surprised, for instance, with all her security forces, that she chooses to get her own hands dirty during the interrogation.
Right.
In a way, she's a bit like the Brigadier in that she won't ask her men to do anything she wouldn't do herself.
Right.
Actually, it's kind of similar to something we were saying on the podcast last week. In this situation, you've got the Master as the scientific advisor to a military organization.
Right.
The only difference being they're the bad guys this time. So he and the Doctor sort of come full circle and are two sides of the same coin in this, including the fact that, the Doctor sort of doesn't arrive at Culverton until almost halfway through the novel. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of build-up to that. And then the Master doesn't arrive until sort of 3/4 of the way through.
Right. And now that you mention it, there is a lot of parallels between, Legion and Unit. You've got Bliss, and then you've got, her second-in-command, Captain McGarrigle, who you could almost draw comparisons with Benton, who, shows up with the Brigadier. They show up to Culverton, and then And then Benton basically holds Alec Whistler's house down when the Brigadier goes off to go assault the compound.
I did love the whole sequence with the nitrous gas bombs as well, the nitrous oxide,
Right.
because it's such a Pertwee thing to do, you know. Of course, you know, these days we know it as MacGyvering.
Right.
And one of the creators, executive producers, script writers, and editors of MacGyver was Terry Nation.
No, creator of the Daleks and the Vord.
The Vord, yes.
The Vord.
Greatest
Should be
villains.
more famous for the Vord, I think.
and the Maya Beast and several invisible aliens
Yes.
to realise. Invisible naked aliens, we might point out. But yeah, so that sort of spirit of invention that Terry Nation introduces to the program, and you know, things like using magnets to get out of a Dalek cell, lead to MacGyver, which the Doctor kind of does this stuff all the time. You know, it's like it's a time flow analog, but it was a modern sculpture. Yeah, so you know, in this case, it's like fertilizer, gas main, milk bottles, smoke bomb.
Yeah, no, it's nitrous oxide.
No,
you get
nitrous
it
oxide
at the
bomb,
dentist.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
he uses iron filing somehow for it as well.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about the chemistry of that, but I'm prepared to believe Mark's done his research.
You know, I'm sure he would have done, because he knows that Doctor Who fans will be picking it apart.
Tear
Who
you to
knows,
pieces
maybe
if you
even
didn't.
recording themselves for
Podcasting
others to
about
listen
it.
to.
Yeah, crazy.
Only crazy people do that.
Clearly.
Oh, man.
All the evidence is right here.
Our podcast, we have cake on the podcast. You see, it's a flight through entirety with cake. So I can't podcast without cake. So,
Yes.
We have this
I can
lovely
recommend
wooden
it.
table. Wooden table and sawdust every day. Scent of sawdust. Clearly why we're like halfway insane. But anyway, we must have been, I think I remember. We were right at the part where the Doctor and the Master meet for the first time, and the Doctor's at the house, and the Master is looking for the one item we've neglected to mention over the past hour, except right at the beginning,
the one driving item in the entire book.
The jade crystal, which turns out is some sort of ninth key for whatever the Gaderene are planning.
Right, they explain it sort of just in a single paragraph at the end that they need these 9 keys to bring their elders and the rest of their population from their dying planet to Earth to propagate themselves and to not die.
Not die. Yeah, once again, another trope there. The entire race is dying, and the only way we can save them is to overtake Earth.
Oh.
The wonderful thing for me when the Doctor and the Master meet is when he steps out from behind Benton. Just completely involuntarily in my head, I heard Dudley Simpson's Master theme, that little
Oh, right.
you know, it was so much how they would have actually done it. Yeah, and I just really like the whole Master Bliss relationship. I like the slightly adversarial nature of it, and for once, the fact that he doesn't realize that he's going to be betrayed. It actually feels a bit more natural, because you know he has underestimated this person because he knows that she is desperate to save her people, and therefore, oh, you know, she's a stupid primitive, she'll make mistakes. And in a way, yeah, you know, she doesn't overpower him because she's particularly clever or anything. She overpowers him because of his arrogance.
Right.
And eventually he gets her in the end. But that whole bit where she turns on him, you know, he's. I think I said it before on our podcast. He's really a crestfallen puppy, you know. He's like, well, but why? Why are you betraying me? Why does everyone betray? Why does everything I whip run away from me? That kind of Homer Simpson line. Yeah, so I thought that was very effective myself. Just because Bliss is a pretty decent character.
And I think right near the end, you find out that the monster that's been in the swamp the entire time is Well, they call him Bliss's brother. I don't know if that's brother in the same sense that like human brother and sister, but they're related somehow, psychologically too, because Bliss throughout the entire book has felt his the monster's pain and want for release.
Yes.
So
I think this actually ties back to right at the beginning with the dark presence lurking underneath the bar when it gets blown up. I'm fairly certain that's supposed to be this worm in the swamp.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think they just land because it's this thing where only embryos can leave the planet or something like that.
Until the main thing
Until they've got the keys thing. And so all of the villagers are kind of, like infected by embryos and stuff.
Right.
Yeah, they're sort of being incubated, and then the embryos will be removed for the apothecaries.
Yeah, so when everyone actually arrives with the 9 keys thing and they can sort of take over properly, but Bliss and her brother have been there for,
30, 40 years.
Yeah. Of course, it's around this time that I guess the Brigadier is going to make his death charge into the wall.
Yeah, it's a little before this, but the doctor stops him and as soon as the Spitfire as soon as you learn there's a Spitfire still in Alec Whistler's backyard, you can totally just see it coming.
Right.
It's going to be used in the end, and of course the doctor takes off in it.
Chekhov Spitfire.
Yeah, it's a Chekhov Spitfire.
I mean, that was one of my favorite scenes.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
I'm just saying it's one of my favorite scenes that is Pertwee jumping into the Spitfire and taking off and dropping the bombs of nitrous oxide on the
shield.
Villagers blocking the wall in front of the Brigadier, and he looks up and sees the Spitfire fly overhead. Just imagining that.
Yeah, it's terribly clever. As is, there's a line in there where the Doctor grabs the joystick of the plane. I made a little red note on that saying, no, the term joystick was invented by Atari in 1972. And it turns out that no, it was the official term for the flight controls of a plane, was the joystick. The computer game joystick was named after that. It was coined, I believe, in 1909 by a French pilot. But he sort of looks at the control for the machine guns and says, oh, no, that's not my style at all.
Right.
And then later, when Alec is up in the Spitfire, he says to Joe, tell Alec to shoot at the...
Right.
It's his style to say, no, you shoot at it. I don't use guns. I just get other people to use guns. Which, is not inconsistent with the character. That is what the character of the Doctor does.
Right.
And when we're not meant to feel 100% comfortable with the character of the Doctor, if you ever feel truly 100% comfortable with a character of the Doctor, he's not interesting anymore.
Right.
Like as warm and fuzzy as Patrick was, you get the evil of the Daleks, where even Jamie says, that's it. You're too cold and callous. We're over. We're through.
Right.
No, right from the beginning, right from Power of the Daleks, he's really off-putting and sort of difficult, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he doesn't reveal to Ben and Polly that he's the Doctor for like 3 episodes in the Power of the Dalek. He doesn't even talk for like the whole first episode.
Just completely ignores them. Where's my recorder and all that.
Guess the diary.
The diary was actually
wanders around the exploding things. But the Doctor lands himself at the aerodrome where at this point all 9 keys have been put in and there's this beam of light from the sky. And this is the point where, in my mind, millions of dollars are just being spent. This CGI beam. No expense was spared.
Yeah, I have to agree. This is where it left 1973 for me. But I didn't mind by that stage because the feel was so good, the atmosphere was so good.
Can't you imagine them realising it the way they realised that sort of terrible Nestine appearing on the radio telescope in Terror of the Autons?
Someone wearing a glove.
Someone wearing a glove. Yeah, that's exactly it. That's how they would have done it. They would have sort of shone a torch. And it would have been great. We would have loved it.
Oh, we would have lapped it up. And then Alan Hood would have drawn this amazing cover of, like, what are those creatures in New England? Trilobites? arthropods. He would have drawn all these arthropods in a whirlwind, and that would have been the Target novelisation cover.
Perfect. Done.
Yeah.
We can go home early.
Because that's the other thing with the Target novelisations. They always drew much, much better monsters than the BBC makeup department could afford.
Well, I mean, I think Kiyan mentioned this on the show once, with the working on a budget of like shoestring and tape.
Yeah.
The BBC.
Yeah, pretty much. Terence Dix said a couple of months ago that Barry Letts came to Doctor Who, and it was a very, very, very poor show. And when he left it, it was only a poor show. You know, he got a bit more money into it.
It's all in what you're comparing it to, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So if we just want to leap right back into it, we have that scene where the 9 keys are in, and you can no longer remove them without going into the beam. But once you go into the beam, you're dead, and you know the third Doctor's standing there and basically says, "I'll do it. I'm going in." And then the fight with Bliss and the Master, and they're all tumbling across the aerodrome trying to stop the other one from doing, you know, whatever they're trying to do at that moment.
Yeah.
The Master and Doctor sort of kind of team up a little. The Master just tricks the Doctor, unsurprisingly.
Well, yeah, it's actually quite funny, really, because that's one of the big criticisms we always have of the Master, where he has these allies who suddenly betray him, and he's all shocked and hurt. Whereas the Doctor goes, "Okay, yes, we'll work together," and the Master goes, "Yeah, we'll work together." And then once they finished working together, it's like, "Ha ha! I had my gun all the time." You know, for once, the Master gets to do it to someone else.
Mm-hmm. And and Whistler now is in the Spitfire, and you know, as you mentioned, he's telling the brig to tell Whistler to shoot the guns and try to shoot the keys, and you know he's not able to because the keys are too small. And then Whistler comes up with the brilliant idea to just, you know, crash the Spitfire into the ground. And I thoroughly believed Whistler was dead.
Yeah, until he came.
So did I.
Parachuting down.
And I really felt that because we'd spent so much time with this character, and because he was so resilient and so brave. You know, that I thought, that is a standard heroic thing to do.
Right.
You know. But I was so glad when there was a bit of a hand-wavy thing of, but he parachuted out.
Right.
It's like, you know what, I don't mind this happy ending. I like this happy ending. Yeah.
There is a sad note. There is, because, I mean, the Master was in the beam of light, and the plane crashes, and the Doctor kind of looks at it, and then he kind of saunters off, and Joe mentions it was someone he went to school with, and it ends on that line that, you know, the Master was someone the Doctor went to school with. And, you know, unless you watch the show and find out he comes back, for all intents and purposes, he could be dead right now. He could just be gone.
Yeah. It's very effective, and I mean, much like the sort of Max possession earlier on, and thinking that Constable Trickett is dead, but he's not dead, and something worse has happened. It tells you everything you need to know about the Doctor and Master's relationship in as few words as possible.
Right.
So it gives you the emotion the Doctor's feeling, not by saying, "Oh, the Doctor felt sad," but it tells you his body language and his action, and the fact that Joe understands that.
Right.
And so when Joe says, "Oh, it's just someone he went to school with," Joe knows it's not just that.
Yeah.
But, you know, that it's something we've discussed about the Doctor and Joe. Their world while they're off travelling is their own secret world. They don't share it with anyone, and that's what she's doing here. She's sort of keeping the Doctor's privacy by realising that, you know, the Doctor doesn't want to have a long discussion about this right now. We'll just sum it up as, "Oh yeah, it's just someone he went to school with." It's it's 3 sentences, but it says so much.
Right. And I think it's a fitting end for the novel, to be honest. I think ending on just kind of a not too extravagant of a note. I mean, I know there was the Spitfire crash, but then having that the additional chapter, it's kind of all back down to earth. You know, there's a burning Spitfire on the aerodrome.
Back down to earth.
And, you know, the Brigadier's standing there, and, you know, Joe and the Doctor, and then it kind of just ends.
Yeah. I think it's powerful.
Yeah, and it just retrospectively shows how important the Master is. I mean, the Master is really, really important to this story. And so it's a surprise that he comes in 2/3 of the way. But, there's a good reason for him being here.
Right. And yeah, I mean,
Well, just as my first Doctor Who novel, I liked the little insights into the characters. You obviously don't get to read or you don't get to see, or the Doctor's or Joe's inner thoughts or anything like they did in the book. Not, and they didn't overdo it either. They sort of just interspersed here and there. At the beginning with the Doctor thinking, oh, he might want to, he feels too at home with UNIT almost.
There's a great chapter, isn't there, where it describes how he reacted when he was first exiled and he used to wander around the TARDIS corridors and be irritated by everyone. And then eventually he did feel like, he belonged in UNIT and like he even noticed that when he went home from the planet Xanthos or whatever the hell that was called, home was UNIT, the UNIT laboratory. And so in a sense, that character development that all of us noticed, Gatiss has picked up on it as well and talks about it too.
And I think
Mark Gatiss, if you're listening, we think this novel's bloody wonderful. I think it's the general consensus.
Contact us and then give us your thoughts on us giving us our thoughts on your book. That would be weird. No, but I think the book is... I think overall I enjoyed the book and it didn't turn me off to reading more books. Like I imagine there could be other books that would do that. I think it definitely did its job of... entertaining as well as emulating the period of the show that it was going for.
If I could recommend one other Pertwee era book, unfortunately it hasn't been republished, so you may need to track down the original version. It's called Face of the Enemy. Have you heard of this one?
Is that the one with the Master and the Brig?
Yes, it's the Master and the Brig because the Doctor's off on Peladon. But there's also a few guest appearances by other unexpected returning characters, and that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, sounds
put it on my list. Maybe we'll read it at some point.
Returning characters.
Is it Tagana?
So
we mentioned Tagana probably at least once an episode.
Once a season at least.
Hooray!
Got to get in on Tagana reference.
When's he coming back? That's it. You're going to love season 21.
Oh yeah,
Revenge of Tagana.
Sorry,
I've said too much.
And also Quillian from the Rescue.
Good old cocky licking.
We love him. He's superb. It's like, who would have thought that the guy in a rubber suit was actually a guy in a rubber suit?
Yeah. He's Australian, and he was a voice of the original Thunderbirds.
Oh,
Ray Barrett.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's what they pay us the big podcasting bucks for.
That's right.
The big podcasting bucks for sure. No, but I think that wraps up everything I was going to say about the book. If anybody else has any thoughts they want to get in about the book or Doctor Who in general, speak now or forever hold your silence.
Yeah, that's it. We almost never get the chance to talk about Doctor Who in a public forum.
Indeed. It's a terrible show, isn't it?
Absolutely horrendous. I don't even know why we watch it, to be honest.
No.
Rubber sets and cardboard monsters.
Oh, no. We love Doctor Who.
Do we?
Didn't we have this exact conversation like 2 weeks ago?
Yes. Yes, we did.
No. But I guess that wraps up the entire episode, I suppose. If you want to shamelessly plug yourself, where can we find you? Where can we go to listen to all your spectacular episodes? I'm still trying to get through all your backlog on my dog
I've been
walks.
listening to some episodes.
Well,
but
I have an exciting announcement about our backlog.
Oh.
Pretty much early on, we didn't know what we were doing, and some of the sound quality is quite terrible. So, in the middle of June, we are actually going to relaunch our website with improved audio on all of our 1960s episodes. And you'll be able to find those at flightthroughentirety.com. You can also find us on Facebook under Flight Through Entirety, as well as iTunes under Flight Through Entirety. We'd love it if more people reviewed us, because we've got 2 5 stars at the moment and 1 1-star review that says, "This was bad."
I feel terrible about that review as well. And it was gutting.
And
absolutely devastating.
We're also on Twitter at FTE Podcast, because Flight Through Entirety is too long for a Twitter handle, and I refuse to shorten through to THRU.
Fair point.
So
fair point.
flightthroughentirety.com is the easiest way to find us, and we're only slightly ahead of your good selves. Next week we are releasing our first podcast about Pertwee's next season, along from you, season 11. So we're about 1 season ahead of you at the moment.
Not too far. But I'll dump a link to your website in the description, as well as your Facebook page and whatever. I'll just dump all the links in the description. That way people don't have to go typing in things.
Links for everyone. Well,
links for everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us. It's been such fun.
Thank you for being on the show. Seriously. Thank you very much for being on the show.
I never would have read this book without you guys, and I've actually really enjoyed it. I went in expecting not to like it very much, but I thought it was a wonderful love letter to the Pertwee era.
Yeah,
definitely.
And we're feeling very fond of the Pertwee era at the moment, despite ourselves.
Of course.
I've always felt fond of the Pertwee era.
But thank you again for being on the show. We mentioned
definitely.
back in our 1-year special we wanted to get more guests on the show, since we hadn't done that before, and you are the first, so you get that award.
Yay.
You can hang on to that. Hang on to that, cherish it, love it, and then feed it, and one day it'll grow into a blooming tree or something.
Planted in your
A
backyard.
blooming giant worm thing planted on my face.
Yes. And of course,
Well, it is Sunday.
the Sunday where you are, it is actually Saturday in the evening, and immediately following this, we will record the episode.
We're from the future.
You do. We will record our next episode immediately following this, and of course, if you listen to the show, you know where to find us. YouTube at Trust Your Doctor, Facebook at Trust Your Doctor. The website is decorativevegetable.com, because we thought it sounded cooler than trustyourdoctor.com. And on iTunes at Trust Your Doctor.
And we have a Twitter now, so yes,
we
you can
have-
find us at TYD Podcast.
Right, that is what we're going for. Gotta get those Twitter followers.
All right.
But,
yes,
thank-
so, go ahead, guys.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much again, and we'll have to do this again sometime. Maybe
For sure,
maybe with the
definitely.
Fourth Doctor novel.
Maybe, when we get there, I'll definitely send you guys a message, and we'll see maybe if we can set something up again. I would love to do it again.
Right, but until
Wonderful.
then, the end.